What do you think, Durhan? Ready to go?
I think we should get going because we've got a lot on here and we've got a very tight cutoff because some of us will need to go into the Health Canada meeting. So off we go.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Bill Dempster with 360 Public Affairs, and it's my honor and pleasure to, first of all, see a lot of familiar faces on the line, and great to see everybody and our esteemed panel and presenters. We're going to get right at it because there's so much to cover right now. Durhan Wong-Rieger, President and CEO of the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, is going to help kick off with some presentations along with Alexander Chambers is with Novartis and health policy and patient access. So welcome, Alex. The idea of today is to take advantage of the fact that Durhan and Alex, and actually maybe a few other people on the line, actually collaborated on a peer review study or review of what's happening at the global level in terms of when Canada gets funded access to new rare disease medicines. And many of you might have already read it. This is your opportunity to hear Alex walk through what those statistics actually mean. The other good thing about who's traveling around the world again is our own Durhan Wong-Rieger, who is spending a lot of time in the US and Europe again, and really picking up on some best practices from the UK, Australia, et cetera. So we're going to get some really good feedback on what you've brought back, Durhan, in terms of how far ahead and the different innovations that are actually coming to bear in other jurisdictions. We're then going to open it up to a panel of discussants that include Carrie McElroy. Carrie, you can wave your hand if you don't mind. Carrie is head of market access and public affairs at Sanofi. Jamie Myra, executive director at Pulmonary Hypertension Association of Canada. Hi, Jamie. We've got Fred Horn, a senior advisor at 360 Public Affairs, also a former Alberta health minister and principal at Horn Associates. And then we've got Brent Fraser, needs no introduction. He's a regular panelist on CORD events like this. And thank you, Brent, for joining us, Vice President of Pharmaceutical Reviews at Cadith. Durhan, would you like me to show the slides or do you want to?
Ange, do you want to do the slides? Or do you want?
I can, doesn't matter. Whoever wants to run them, I can run them.
It doesn't matter. Somebody do the slides.
I've got them.
Okay.
Or somebody does. There you go.
Okay. We'll start with the slides, whoever's running it. So thank you again very much. Thank you, Bill, as always, for shepherding us through, and also huge thanks to everybody for joining us. This is, in fact, our spring series into setting up Canada's rare disease drug strategy. And I apologize in advance because we have shoved something else into this agenda, which was already going to be jam-packed, but to really take advantage of the fact that, as some of you have been invited to, the consultations that Health Canada is now holding on the rare disease drug strategy. They released last week a proposed draft strategy framework. And I know that some groups have already had the opportunity to be in that consultation. A number of us as patient organizations will be attending immediately after this meeting at 1 o'clock. So we thought it was, in fact, timely for us to actually have an introductory discussion here, and we hopefully will be able to come back after some of the other consultations have taken place to kind of build on what is being presented. So I think this is great. It certainly is great that the government is still poised in terms of pushing forth with their commitment on $500 million a year, $1 billion to set up. But I think it will be beholden for us to actually make sure that we're shaping that in the way that we want. We have really called this series setting up a smart rare disease system and setting up a smart rare disease drug system. And I won't go over again what those SMART acronyms might mean, but it really does talk about it in terms of planning, talks about it in terms of the technology we're going to be using, and also talks about the kinds of approaches that we want to have in setting up our drug access. And to start off, we're going to have Alex, who's going to present to us, as Bill said, a review that she led with and a number of us collaborated on, talk a little bit about where we are in Canada relative to where we want to be. And then I'm going to present to you some high level around two systems and maybe a little bit from Iser of what we feel are some smart approaches that we might want to be able to add more into our own thinking. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who's going to kick it off for us.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Durhan, and thanks for the invitation today to talk a little bit about this work that we actually started about 2 years ago now, really trying to get a handle on what access looked like in Canada, really from a more of a quantitative look at access is what we were looking at. And so we had initially started by modeling this analysis after the weight studies that are done in Europe on an annual basis, really looking at their access to therapies in Europe. So there were three pillars or three categories that we really wanted to look at. The first one was looking at the number of drugs that were coming into the country and watching them go through the process. The second was trying to understand what percentage of these drugs were publicly reimbursed and available to Canadians. And then lastly, looking at the timelines. So if you look at this slide, from when we did our analysis from 2015 to 2020, there were 63 drugs with EMA approval that had an orphan drug designation. Of those, 41 had Health Canada approval. There were 3 other drugs that had been submitted to Health Canada, but ultimately didn't receive the Health Canada approval. From there were 36 submissions to CADTH. Of those, there were 30 positive CADTH recommendations, and then 24 went on to have a completed PCPA negotiation at the time that we did the analysis. And I think for me, what stood out that was most interesting of this part of the analysis, it wasn't what happened after Health Canada. I think that's been documented, and we understand there are some pain points through the system. But it was really looking at, there's a third of those drugs that aren't even coming into Canada, and really trying to understand what are those drugs. And even just as Durhan mentioned, as we're embarking on this national strategy for rare disease, why aren't these drugs being entering the Canadian market? Does it have to do with manufacturing? Does it have to do with the size of the Canadian market? Does it have to do with the challenges of the system? I think in order to identify and understand, what's happening, I think we need to look at these therapies and understand why they aren't coming into the country if we're thinking about how to improve access for patients. So if you want to go to the next slide. So as I said, there were three things that we looked at. So the first one was the number of drugs entering the system. And then the second was looking at the percentage of drugs that are publicly reimbursed. And I think one of the limitations, which I need to point out in our study, is we only looked at public reimbursement, recognizing that in Canada, there is a segment of the population that does have private coverage, and we didn't look at that. Our study really only focused that data that were available in the public domain, and it was hard to understand private coverage. Nevertheless, you can have a look here and see on the left-hand side, the drugs that had EMA approval and then their public reimbursement across European countries. And then on the right, Health Canada approval and then public reimbursement across the provinces. And then if you go to the last, and I have one more slide, go to the next slide. And so, as I said, the third part that we looked at was timelines. And, and again, I don't need to highlight that for this group. There are a lot of patients who are very impatient, waiting and trying to find access to some of these therapies. And so we broke it down into the time from regulatory approval to public reimbursement for those under a year, between 1 and 2 years, and then beyond, and 2 years and beyond. And so you can see there how it breaks down. In Canada, the provinces are in the orange bars. I apologize. This is a little small. So just in conclusion, I think, this is a timely analysis as Health Canada continues to look at this national strategy for rare disease. And as they're talking about access and improving access, I think it's really important to understand what do they mean by that. And these are just three measures that we looked at that we could, get a handle on from a public perspective. But I think when you're thinking about access, I think as it'll be important for them to be able to measure their success and really understand what it is that they're trying to achieve. So if you're interested, please, go ahead and read the study in more detail, but I'll stop there for now because I know there's a lot to cover.
Alex, that was absolutely brilliant. The next time I need somebody who can take a lot of information and present it concisely, I'm going to call on you. So there we are. Really, I want to kind of move through a little bit quickly then in terms of these next slides. There's a lot of text on them. You will get the slides and you can read the details, but I will not try to put the details into it. But just to give you sort of a high level, as Bill said, just recently been traveling a bit again. So we've had the opportunity to also visit with some other countries, other drug systems. And I loved when Alex says, patients are impatient. And quite frankly, I was just coming back from Boston at a meeting with MIT's New Digs on funding for gene therapies. And we waited 6 hours in the Boston airport to take off. I mean, there is, in fact, I think, huge impatience among our patients. And I think that is why we're trying to move forward in terms of this drug strategy. So it's absolutely the wait times. It's absolutely which drugs are coming to Canada. But as we will see, hopefully, with this kind of brief presentation on the UK and even on the Australia, a stunning difference between kind of what our approach is, and that is, what is it we're trying to get access to? Because what patients really want is access to those new therapies, those innovative therapies, those therapies that are coming in that are life-saving, life-altering, and in many cases providing those profound differences, as well as obviously the access to the many other drugs that have been in. So I just wanted to, as we said, we use the acronym of SMART, but I was quite pleased to see the UK talking about smart drug access. And actually, we had start calling it before I actually kind of ran across this. And what I think is stunning about what the UK is doing is that they have actually put in very strongly their philosophy around access to therapies. And this isn't just rare disease therapies, but certainly the rare, as you will see, fits strongly in there. And their philosophy, their approach, their policy approach is that we need in the UK to be promoting innovation while controlling costs. And their approach then, including the HTA, really encompasses this. And what we can see is NICE, the Scottish Medicines Consortium, and also the Wales Consortium, all have come across to say, look, we need to, first of all, overcome the limitations of a strict quality approach. That doesn't serve us well when we're talking about innovative therapies, not just rare. We have to consider factors like end-of-life criteria, highly specialized treatments, and populations with unmet need. This is not unlike, I think, what CADIS has been saying, and certainly we saw in their strategic plan a real strong echoing of this. Our challenge is how do we make it so that it's actually impactful? They also have really recognized the fact that with the personalized therapies, with the genomics medicines, including those that are for cancer, but also now increasingly for other conditions, including cardiovascular diseases, including immunological diseases, that we're going to have a different approach to bringing these therapies in if we want to make them available to people in a timely fashion. And that is indeed the goal. I also love the fact that as we were talking with them, they talked about the fact that they have been embracing a policy of smart pricing. I think this is a concern to everybody. I don't know that there's a single patient that would not really be supportive of the fact that, yes, we need to make sure drugs are going to be smartly priced, that we need to make sure that we are as cost effective and affordable as possible. And what the UK, what England here has done is deliberately embarked on a process in which they say we will be able to do deals that will give us smart pricing, and at the same time, making sure we bring in these therapies. Their statement is very clear. We need to have exceptional, with smart deals, we will have exceptional value for taxpayers, those paying for the drugs, supply chain resilience or plurality, so that we don't have to worry about, shortages or not getting access, greater utilization of NHS resources, the National Health Service resources, and certainly at the end of the day, I love the statement, more convenient, kinder treatment options. And I won't go through all the deals here, but every one of these, except for one, is actually a deal for rare disease therapy. And that is, can we focus on a pricing strategy that will give us the innovation, but also make sure that we bring in these therapies in a way that's going to be able to serve the largest number of patients feasible under the policy, but also at the end, as we say, delivering value back to the taxpayers, value back to the health systems. And one of the ways it does that is they've been able to say, these therapies, because they're life-saving, because they're altering, because of the way in which they work, we're going to have fewer hospital admissions. We're going to have fewer injections, so that people are not necessarily going to have to poke themselves as much or be subject to hospital admissions to get access to it. We can be getting these products at home. So the choice of having therapies that are also going to allow them to be either one-off therapies or oral therapies, hugely important. And this goes the gamut from rare diseases, but also, as they say, cancer therapies. One of the things that was really stunning about it was they're in fact making a price deal for a large population therapy, one that one would maybe normally think, oh my gosh, this impact in terms of the cost on the system is going to be huge. But what they say is that by having a large scale deal, by being able to make them available to many people because of the benefits of them, we're going to actually be able to improve the quality of life, lower the morbidity, lower the use of the healthcare resources. And as they say, at the end of the day, they're saying the more we can make these innovative treatments available to the right patients at the right price, the more we as a country are going to be getting future investments. We're going to get the research, we're going to get the clinical trials. What we need to do is make sure we can substitute Canada in there for the UK. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through this again. I've just said it again. These are other examples of it. Fair pricing and best prices. This is the other thing that I think is really stunning about what they're saying. They're not saying we need the lowest possible price. What they want to say is that we want to have fair pricing that's going to return back to the researchers, to the innovators, to the companies, in order for them to continue to do the innovation, but also, of course, fair pricing back to the health services, back to the taxpayers, in order for the system to be affordable and sustainable. Where's the balance there? The other thing that's really important in there is what they say is access. And this is something that we've been pushing as well, especially in the rare diseases community. Faster and wider access is really a benefit to the company, which should be a motivation for the prices to be coming in at a much better value for the taxpayers. We recognize that in many cases, many of these therapies come in and the population that's been approved by the regulator is much broader than the population that the system is willing to pay for, or that the system is willing to recognize being so-called cost effective. So there are many ways in which we can make these therapies available and be able to negotiate a much better price. If you can serve more patients, if you can serve them quicker, it's a better return to the company. It's better for the patients. It's better for the system. This is what we're talking about. So I think what we need to do is take a page out of here. Now, we recognize that in Canada, one of the challenges is that we've got a two-step process as opposed to the UK. We've got CADTH, which is doing the assessments, which is able to look at value for the therapy, which is looking at the criteria. And then we go to a separate step, which says, okay, now the negotiators for the payers, in this case, as Alex says, the public payers, is the PCPA. this makes a real disconnect and also makes a long time delay. We go from CADA to that time delay. We need to be able to shorten that, to eliminate that. We need to have a system that provides us with that seamless one step, approval and reimbursement. We also saw that what the UK has been able to do in terms of fast access is to set up negotiations, set up contracts that would allow them to expand those contracts as new indications are actually brought in for reimbursement without needing to go back to the assessment phase, without needing to go back to the whole negotiation phase. Next slide. Sorry, I'm taking way too long on this. I'm going to move beyond this. So I won't go through the ICER thing. I wanted to, but I think what I wanted to say, for those of you who know ICER is the HTA body in the US, which has no binding, commitments in terms of the payers, but actually does the health technology assessments. And what they did was a recent review in terms of the HTA for rare disease therapies. And April came back to say that what we really recognize is that the standard traditional model of HTA assessment and the standard qualities do not work for rare diseases. So we have to do something else. And I think, again, this is not something new for us, and we have heard CADF and INES also say that we need to look at other factors. But in many cases, those other factors are so important, it really begs the question, why are we doing the standard assessment then? If in fact they're not going to give us value, can we not just go directly to looking at what's the other approach if we look at the other factors? I think that's the point. Next slide, please. So this new pathway that we're also talking about is going to looking at the UK. I'm going to skip all of this and we'll move to it. This is a great notion in terms of they're having innovative licensing and access pathway. It's really important because it really does point to the UK philosophy that we want to do is foster innovation, and that we can foster innovation and also deliver value back to the taxpayers, back to the system, but most importantly, back to the patients. These are not, conflicting kinds of goals, but in fact, one supports the other. Next slide. So the Australian government has recently come out with a new, reimbursement agreement between the Medicines Australia, which is the pharmaceutical industry, and the government, and they've ended up with a new approach that they have actually just put in. Again, I won't belabor it. I really encourage people to take a look at it. What you see is the heart of the agreement says, we want to make sure that we're going to capture and recognize the value of innovative medicines and to streamline that access in Australia for patients, because we believe that being able to do that, having timely access to new medicines, is absolutely going to ensure that we're going to have the best health outcomes, and it's going to have the best impact in terms of our healthcare system. A recognition again. Next slide. We have been very, pleased to be able to continue to collaborate with Rare Voices Australia, which is the rare disease community there, in terms of how they're submitting to this. And I think this is, again, the recognition. Some of the principles they've got are very much the same as what we've been talking about in terms of the principles around a proposed rare disease drug strategy. But I think beyond that, what they've also been able to push for is the continual investment in new medicines. And I think this is something that we have not actually had the commitment to here, and the recognition that new medicines, much more effective medicines that deliver value to the patients, can also be those same ones that deliver value to the system. Next slide. And again, with an HTA that really looks at, how do we do, as they say, reduce the time to access, make sure, I like this statement very strongly, I wish we had it, maintain the attractiveness of Australia as a first launch country to build on Australia's status as a world leader in providing patients access to affordable healthcare. So the quicker we can get in the innovative medicines to the right patients, the more we're going to be able to deliver value to all of the healthcare system. And I think this is something that, again, finding that balance, finding the right spot, do not see them as, kind of competing or opposing goals. and having assessment processes that are going to keep pace with rapid advances in health technology. Again, as I said, we were very pleased with what Catalyst was presenting in terms of their strategic plan. The same idea. We need to be agile. We need to be able to adapt how we're assessing with the new therapies that are coming in to make sure that we've got methodologies that are indeed fit for purpose and do not become a barrier in order for patients to get access. The last thing I will put in here is what Medicines Australia has said, and what the government of Australia said, is that the important role of the patient voice, that it is essential that the patient, what they call consumer voice, is integrated into every single step of the process. And I think, Australia is one of the first HTA bodies to actually have a patient that sat on their HTA review committee. And over the years, they have actually struggled to keep up with where the advances were in other countries, but have come back to say we need strongly to make sure the consumer voice is in there, and that consumer engagement process, as they call it, is absolutely integral to driving how we're going to be proceeding in terms of our assessment. So, and from early stage all the way through to the ongoing monitoring. Next slide. This is their national medicines policy. I won't belabor it. Australia has a very interesting forum that we don't have and we don't see in other countries. And that is a forum that really is designed to absolutely optimize prescribing and to optimize then the collaboration among all of the sectors to make sure that there is, in fact, the right kind of an approach to managing and monitoring the medicines, in addition to bringing them in. So it's something that I've had the privilege of being part of some of their forums on, which I think is something that we could think about as we're moving forward, especially in the rare diseases arena. Everybody coming together, agreement around prescribing guidelines, agreement around how they're going to be monitored, and to be able to continue to be updated as we move forward with more evidence. Next slide. I feel I'm much too stuff here. This is, again, a commitment to the values, the same values that we've seen, but I won't belabor it. We do see very strongly in here, and Rare Voices Australia has actually included the 3 additional principles that we've talked about. We need to be timely in terms of our medicines policy. We need to make sure that what we're doing in terms of assessments, but also in terms of availability, is in fact fit for purpose, meaning that we need to make sure that they're fit certainly for rare diseases and innovative therapies, and a focus on ongoing support for innovation. Next. So I wonder, Bill, should I stop here, or should I kind of just go into kind of what we've gotten from Canada? Do you want to stop and let people reflect on what we've seen?
I think we should take a pause here, and what we should do is save 10 minutes at 12:50. So let's go back in about 20 minutes after a good discussion with the group. And in fact, we've got some really good insights on the chat panel. So thank you for contributing those. I think the first question we should throw out is to Fred Horn. Fred is a pioneer in Canada in terms of the concept of value-based healthcare, which values measuring not just the inputs of how much things cost on the front end, but also the outcomes that we're eventually buying or securing. I'm just wondering, Fred, are there any insights from the value-based healthcare approach that resonate with you from what you heard from Durhan and Alex? Especially around the metrics that Alex presented. Is there something there that we could potentially get in a smart rare disease drug strategy in Canada?
Thanks, Bill, and thanks to Durhan for the invitation. So value-based healthcare, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is it's a concept that was first described by Porter and Teisberg at Harvard. And basically the notion or the underlying theory is that the health system should pay for best outcomes. All inputs to the health system should support best patient and health system outcomes, as measured by everything from clinical outcomes to patient-reported outcomes to value for public dollars. As opposed to sort of the traditional mindset, at least in Canada, which is a focus on cost. And more recently, as health budgets have become more and more constrained and challenged by COVID, policy is really, in my opinion, is really focused more on cost containment of line items within the health budget for each provincial government. So I think there has been lots of progress in Canada over the last few years. Healthcare Excellence Canada, the Conference Board, a number of other organizations, including some industry players, have tried to look for alternatives to some of our traditional processes around assessment and reimbursement that could support a values-based approach. In the area of rare disease, I mean, this seems to me to be one of the greatest opportunities that we have, particularly when we look the fact that some of the therapies we're talking about, present huge opportunities for cost avoidance in other parts of the system, hospitalization, and many other costs. And more importantly, many of them represent a cure and a contribution that allows the patient and the people around the patient to contribute their full potential to society as a result of not living a life focused on managing a rare and in some cases very difficult disease. So for those of you in the pharmaceutical world, I mean, we hear value-based healthcare most often talked about in terms of reimbursement approaches, everything from managed access to some of the global pharma management approaches that that Durhan has alluded to in her presentation, looking at those expenditures as a full envelope and managing within that portfolio, as opposed to making black and white year and nay decisions around individual drug listings. So I think that's one way that we can look at it. But if you really study what what is the structure that supports a value-based approach in healthcare, it does require some dedicated components. Access to data collection and analysis, specific to the area that you're looking at is key. And Court has been a champion in calling for the importance of registries and other infrastructure, that's dedicated to support this. Something that's called bundled payments, basically in our terms in Canada, that would mean not separating the assessment and delivery from the actual budget that's connected to supporting rapid access. So you'd have to somehow divorce this discussion from the traditional drug program line item that appears in a ministry budget, and talk about it in an integrated way as you would data with the overall strategy. And I think SMART is a really good approach to begin to do this. So those are a couple of early comments, Bill, but I mean, I think it holds a lot of potential. I would still say the context should be, what do Canadians need, and what should they be able to reasonably expect when it comes to access to drugs for rare diseases, and what are those outcomes we're looking for, and then work backwards, as opposed to trying to retrofit, that two-tiered world that Durhan described to support something that it's not going to be really capable of doing.
Thanks, Fred. That's really helpful. Durhan, I think you're taking some notes there for the next session, potentially with Health Canada. Let's turn to Carrie briefly. What are the conversations that are happening at the global level about and around Canada? I just want to build on what Alex sort of put out there early with the data that showed that a third of medicines that got orphan drug designations in the EMEA are not actually brought to Canada or even applied to Health Canada for approval. So what are the conversations today that might actually cause that to happen, that you're involved in? And then what are you hoping the conversations change to, based on what you heard Durhan say is happening elsewhere? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to speak today and want to thank Durhan for her leadership and Court's continued leadership on all things rare in Canada. I've been at this game for a bit, as Durhan will validate. And I'll tell you, the fact that Health Canada has really stepped forward over the past number of months is a testimony to the impact I think the entire core community has had when we all work together at this. Sanofi, I've had the good fortune of being here for 21 years, and it's a multinational global healthcare company. And we've, got a true global presence, especially with our heritage in rare. And, we walk the talk. We've been in Canada for over 100 years, and we're the largest life sciences investor. And so when it comes to innovation and really committing to Canada, we have that commitment from our global organization. I'm optimistic when I look at our pipeline. It's pretty robust over the next, say, 3 to 5 years. And I would estimate about a third of those products are in the rare space. But actually, in my role, trying to get those products to come to Canada is challenging for many reasons. And, I think Fred touched upon it accurately when we look at some of the, I would say, line items, sort of that approach and a siloed approach. We really need all of the agencies and all of the partners in the system talking and working together, because if we continue to try to squeeze this into the existing system, it becomes very challenging, and I'm not sure we're set up for success. So I think that with the ambition, and I'm glad to see Brent here, and I know that Cadith is really making some movement as it relates to real world evidence and real world data. And I think that's the kind of ambition and thinking outside of the box that will be critical to moving pieces here. And I've said many times, many of you have probably heard me say that Canada is competing on the global stage. When you work for a global organization, they're very well and alive to all of the elements and how different countries work and what best looks like. And so I think there's an opportunity here to not reinvent the wheel, to take the best practices of each of the countries, with a focus on patients and ensuring that we improve our outcomes and access to new medicines. And I think with that spirit and that kind of approach, you'll have a different sense of global organizations and their ambition coming to Canada. I think there's an opportunity. We spoke yesterday with Health Canada. I was pleased to be part of that conversation. And, many of us who work for global organizations have offered the, knowledge generation and to lend that to Canada and to work as collaborators to end at the right place. So I'll stop there, and I'm sure there's someone else that wants to weigh in here. Bill, thank you.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Bren, I was on the information session that Cadith recently hosted, and really encouraged by some of the signals that were coming out of Suzanne and you and the leadership at Cadith that seemed to be portending, just a focus on new ways to do things, or signals that Canada should be a destination for innovation and access to medicines and research. Anything that you heard today that you could help summarize in terms of what Cadith is doing? And is my optimism about what I heard accurate at all? And any reaction to that in terms of where Cadith is going in response to a lot of the stuff that we've talked about this morning?
Thanks, Bill. So maybe just highlight a few things. I do agree with some of the comments that Fred had raised about having a more integrated approach to the funding of some of these products. I think some of the advantages that the UK and Australia have over Canada is the fact that their systems are more tightly integrated. So, and I think Durhan mentioned this earlier, the HTA body is separate from the negotiations body. We don't really talk about files together until after a recommendation is out, and they have a need for increased clarity around some of the information that may be within our reports. So it is a bit of a staged process, whereas from what I understand, particularly in the UK, there's some discussions that can happen up front. It's still sort of partitioned away from the HTA review piece, but because they have a more of a single payer type model, it's easier to implement some of these components. Very different in Canada when we're providing recommendations to, I think, up to 18 different drug plans across Canada. And then they have to come together through PCPA to determine how they're going to move forward with a recommendation from CADIS. I will say, though, that we are starting to see a number of drugs that do go beyond the drug plans themselves. And so we've been trying to pull together implementation panels to help provide guidance to the jurisdictions around some of the other issues that are maybe not drug line specific that need to be addressed in order to move forward with funding. And this in particular sort of came up through the CAR-T products that were coming forward into Canada. Now, mind you, that was a relatively slow process. I think it was because trying to get all the right people around the table to have discussions that really crossed provincial jurisdictions and borders was quite challenging. And it was the first time I think something of this magnitude was discussed. But I do understand that they are starting to move forward with some of the proposals and to support the funding of those treatments. So it's slow, but I think there is some movement that is happening within jurisdictions to help manage some of these products. Real world evidence is obviously very important within CADTH right now, and we are looking at how do we support some of our reviews and ongoing recommendation work to align with some of the RWE pieces that are happening within CADTH as well. We have also talked about looking at making adjustments to the economic model. Like if there are specific outcomes that should be included, the economic team is not adverse to including that within the models and calculating sort of the overall impact. I would say, though, that we don't focus our recommendations on cost, and we actually do not allow our committees to make a funding recommendation where they feel the cost is far exceeds the value. They really can only provide a negative recommendation when they feel that the clinical data is so uncertain that it just cannot support its use in the Canadian context. So we don't reject based on cost. I think that's an important distinction that should be highlighted. I think the other piece, just to let people know, like we're often criticized for not including other outcomes within our economic analyses, but when we ask companies or sponsors to provide that information so that it could be included in the analyses, the answer is no. They don't have the information. They think it should be included, but they don't have any data on it. And so if we're to go into patient registries to try to collect that data, that is going to have an impact on timelines. So a lot of this stuff is happening later on. The discussions are happening almost too late in the process and after recommendations have been issued. I think the other part that we're hearing, quite frankly, is that when jurisdictions approach companies with sort of innovative type of approaches for funding, they're often told that no, they're not interested because it's going to take too long to work out the logistics. They would rather just negotiate on price. So I don't think, we can't have a scenario where groups are criticizing other groups of not going down a particular path, yet they're also not making it easy for the other partners to go down a particular route as well. And I think there needs to be a bit of acknowledgement about, there's more than just a couple of players in this process. And that there's concerns on all parts. And I think we have a tendency to highlight the HTA process and the negotiations process without taking a step back and looking at, are we actually even answering the right questions when submissions are being made to the regulators, which are different, as everybody knows, to what is required for an HTA review. And I think that does speak to the importance of things such as registry information, understanding what is available, where can you go to get this information, which we're only just starting, I think, to document this now with any degree of rigor.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brent. A lot to unpack there. What my takeaway from what you're saying, though, is that you're trying to find some solutions to some problems, and sometimes how they're resolved now may not be obvious from the outside world because these are part of confidential negotiations or discussions. And I mean, Durhan, I'm sure you're going to have some thoughts on how to get at that. Let's maybe turn to Jamie at PHA Canada. What's been your experience in terms of advocating for access to medicines here, what you've seen globally, and trying to get those products into Canada. And what are the, one, two, or three things you would say that we need for the PHA community and the rare disease community that you'd like to see?
Oh, well, certainly a lot of what we've experienced has already been touched on, in particular by Durhan. The delays to access have been considerable in some cases. We have a treatment right now that is just now being picked up by provinces for funding, and the patent is about to expire now. And so that whole model that was put in place to protect that innovation has not worked for the company. It hasn't worked for patients. It hasn't really worked for anybody. And so I think we definitely want to see the process streamlined, and the pressure. Patients to feel less pressure to have to advocate at every step of the way, to advocate at CADIT during the health technology assessment process, so that those questions that you make sure we're asking the right questions, and that the value that's being brought to patients is being well understood. And yet then we have to do it all over again. And the PCPA process seems pretty broken, I think, from my perspective, where we're not really seeing that collaboration result in a process that gets, well, we certainly don't see the timelines working the way they're supposed to. But regardless of the body that is PCPA, we're still advocating for access at individual provinces all the time, because we don't see that consistency being achieved. So so all of those are places for improvement. I think the other big concern, obviously, for our community is, we're in a very exciting place in the world of pulmonary arterial hypertension, where there's real opportunity to dramatically change people's lives. To, like Fred said, let people who are in the prime of their life go on and live for decades to enjoy that life, to contribute to society. We can do that in PH. But if those innovations don't come to Canada, because Canada is not an attractive place, our patients are going to get left behind. And so there's a lot of concern around that. I think that there's so much opportunity, but that somehow in Canada we might not be positioned to benefit from all of that. So, with all of that being said, I think, the new thing I think I wanted to add to the conversation is the need to build capacity in patients to participate in these new systems, whatever this new system may be. And I agree with Cord's position that we can't wait for perfection. We have to, we want to get the right pieces in place, but we also have to start doing things and, start trying new things to see what works and what isn't going to work for us here. But we always talk about patients being involved in every single step of the way, whether it be from, adaptive clinical trials through to managed access to figuring out what value means in the context of a drug that impacts quality of life, but perhaps not other clinical measures in the same way. And then, just that role of real world evidence. We keep talking about real world evidence. We can't get it without patients. And so patients have to understand what all of these things are about. They can't just, if they get all of their knowledge about, innovation and new medicines and drug access from politicians and the media, they will never have the understanding that they need to be meaningful participants in this process, to actually make shared decisions around what innovation should we even be striving for? What clinical trials should we be implementing? What is value in the context of a rare disease therapy? So I think, that means building capacity for patients to be educated, to be connected, to be part of these systems right from the ground up. And it's not enough for it to be, one patient representative representing all rare diseases. It means every rare disease needs to have opportunity to build the capacity of their community to be engaged.
Jamie, you're describing Cord right now, it seems. And that's
Cord needs more than Durhan. Durhan, for all of, as much as we all respect and admire you, we need more Durhans, right? We need more Durhans. We can't have, Canada is far too complex and big and diverse a country to rely on a 1 or 2 person organization to represent all those needs in such a complex new system.
Well, let's get everyone with some hair color and see what we can do. Okay. Durhan, and thank you for the panel was really good. Very appreciated. All of this, we're taking copious notes, and it's actually a really good segue into what Durhan is going to walk through in terms of, what Cord has seen on the rare disease drug strategy, because we're going to be going right in 8 minutes to another session. So Angela is just pulling up the slides on this, but thank you again to the panel. Durhan, you've got 8 minutes before you have to go on to a Health Canada consult.
Thank you very much. And that was brilliant, Jamie. Thank you very much. And you're right. We need to be investing in patient engagement, patient development, patient training, but also we need to give resources to patients to be able to do it. I think that's a big challenge. So just to really quickly, as Bill says, some of us have been invited into this next consultations, and some for patient organizations, and some will be going in as patients and families, I think, in the following week. We just wanted to say is that I have to say is that the draft framework that just came out from Health Canada, it started off with a bang. It reiterated everything that we heard on what we heard, and we kind of said, "Oh wow, yeah, that's exactly what you heard what we said," and there was a commitment again to saying that yes, we've got this $500 million a year, $1 billion to set up, and we're going to do that. They put in there the principles that we're all committed to, and who can not agree that it should be patient-centered and ethical and all that kind of stuff. I think where it started to break down was when we started talking about what's the implementation, what's the next step. And, it started with these investment in 4 strategic pillars, which if you look at it closely, they're not 4 strategic pillars. We provided pillars. The pillars have to be infrastructure in terms of setting up, number 1, centers of excellence with patient registries, with the ability to capture real world evidence. We have to have pillars that are actually going to be investment in terms of fostering innovation and research. And we definitely need, as Jamie just said, pillar that would involve, investing in patients to be able to be fully participating. This, I think, was a real disappointment, because really all they said was, number 1, that a lot of stuff was around advisory and, and feasibility. But in fact, none of these really were designed to really set up a real rare disease drug strategy. Just put to the next slide, because I don't want to lose our time here entirely, Ange. So pillar 1, improve access to rare disease treatments and make it consistent across Canada. Okay. But as I put in here, that can be a death spiral, because if all we're talking about is improving access without actually committing to the fact that we will have new treatments, and that we will invest in the innovation, and that we will make them available to people in a timely fashion, I think this is not going to help us. Just getting consistent access to the drugs that are already there or should be there is not enough. And I think that's what we need. We need to have commitment to the best, the same as Australia says, the same as the UK says, the same as France says, the same as Germany says, the same as Belgium says. We need to be at that stage. Optimize, collect, and use data along drug system continuum across the life cycle. Yes, of course. And we need to make sure it's based on adaptive learning. But I go back to what Brent says, we've got to invest in these systems that are going to match kind of what the drugs are coming in. Go to the next one, please. Identify pillar 3 is to support optimal patient outcomes and sustainability of health system by spending on drugs that bring value for money. I think this is the real, I don't know, I hate to use bad language, but it's sort of that weasel word of what is value for money, and clearly what are optimal patient outcomes. Again, unless we are going to be committed to the fact that we are going to have a genuine assessment that is fit to purpose and at the right time. And that was my only challenge, back to what Brent was saying. It isn't that we can't and shouldn't be doing assessments on value for money. That's what everybody says. We need to do them when we've got the information. And I like what Francois put in the chat line. If we're going to do it at the time when we're just going to discount the value on the basis of uncertainty, then there's no sense in doing it. And I think this is what Germany, France, and others have taught us. We need to be able to put the drugs into place, and we need to make them accessible. We need to have systems that collect the real world evidence, and then we're able to drill down much more in terms of what the value proposition is, and we can adapt to what that is going to be on a go-forward basis. The last one is strengthening the alignment of research and innovation. We agree with that. Sadly, if you go to the next slide, Ange, But we did not see in the implementation, which is where the big disappointment comes in. None of that is really addressed. Basically, what we saw was that Health Canada is proposing that we have a drug formulary for rare disease drugs that are going to be picking up drugs of common concern. I don't even know what a rare disease drug of common concern is. I mean, this flies in the face of what is a rare disease drug? I mean, the concern that cystic fibrosis, that PHA, that, Fabry's, that, hemophilia, that all of these have. Is there a common concern here? Is there a common drug here? What are we talking about here? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to get outraged about this, but this just sort of struck me in the gut as saying such a huge disconnect between what we heard reported, between what the principles are going to be. And then this is the first opportunity, this is the first offering, is that you're going to give me a list of drugs of common concern. I don't even know what that means. And I think it would put us into the spiral of trying to figure out who's going to decide what's on that list, who's going to be able to make the, the value proposition here. I'm sorry, this really is not what we anticipated. Next slide. Governance. And again, this falls far short of what we talked about. We talked about, Jamie just said it again, patient engagement, patient involvement. We need to be fully there in terms of the multi-stakeholders. We should make sure that we're able to train, patients to take part, but all the other stakeholders as well. We need to have that independent rare disease drug program that we can all commit into. And then the part around transparency, of course, who would not agree with transparency, but we really have to drill down on what we're talking about here and what should be included in there and what is the access. The thing that is not transparent at the moment, and Kata, I'm sorry that, I will have to say this, where I find the biggest deficiency is transparency to the assessment process. What goes into those assessments, what is actually considered, and how those are actually done. And I think in the international comparisons, we've seen that over and over again. Many other countries, many other jurisdictions makes it very clear in terms of what we use as info and how we came to the outcomes. We don't necessarily get that when we're sitting here and looking at Canada. So that's where we would like to see it being done. And we would like to make sure that we're going to have that appropriate kind of risk sharing. Do I have another slide in here? Okay, no, this is the most important thing. Yeah, go to that next slide. This is important because we've only got 1 minute left, Ange. This is our next series of webinars that are coming up. Patient registries will be next week. May 5th will be what I call the centerpiece of what we want to do. We need centers of excellence. We need to make sure we're investing in them. Otherwise, none of this is actually going to work. And then we're going to look at where are the cases that are really the challenges. And then getting to May 26th, how do we set up an economic case? Because we believe in cost effectiveness. We believe in value for money. We just need to make sure we're putting the right things in. Most importantly, I need everybody to commit to coming to Ottawa, June 8th and 9th. We will have our first live conference, with CORD at that time. And we need to make sure that we're there to make a significant statement to say the rare disease community is alive and well, and we're going to be a force that's actually going to make sure that the opportunity to invest $500 million a year in a rare disease drug strategy goes to what it is that we need to make happen in order for patients to get the best access and the system gets the best value for that investment. So I need to see you all of there in June. Those of you are patients who need scholarships, let us know. Those of you who are industry, do come and make sure you're there to support us. Those are the clinicians and the researchers there. We want to make sure that you're there and you're there to talk about the importance of the investment. So we're done. I gotta go. We gotta go.
Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time, which is coming up next week, I think. And yeah, for those of you on the Health Canada consult, best of luck. Apparently, there are going to be several more throughout the month of May. So this conference in June is going to be very timely and helpful in terms of tying together the patient and other stakeholder input to those consultations. So we'll see you very shortly.